Today we are making a resin ocean platter. We're going to start by mixing our resin. This is a general purpose epoxy, so we're going to do equal parts of part A and part B. Then we mix for about 2 minutes or until the resin turns cloudy and then back to clear. We then let it sit for 2 minutes and we mix for another 2 minutes. Then we're going to grab a couple smaller cups and pour the resin that we need into each one. For this pour, I'm using 3 different colors, plus clear. One is going to be dark blue, one is going to be a blue-green, and one is going to be white. For the white color, I'm going to use a combination of an opaque white dye and some pearl-colored pigment. You may be able to tell that the white was still a little bit translucent, so I added a little bit more of that pearl color to make sure that it wasn't going to be see-through. Up next, we have our blue-green color. I like leaving this one as just the pigment, as it kind of has a color shift tendency to it already. And lastly, we're going to do our deep blue. This one we're going to make sure is very dark, so we're going to use a combination of sapphire and black to make a color that's actually a little bit darker than we want. There's 2 reasons for this. The first is when we pour resin in a thin layer, the color usually is a little bit lighter, as well as we're using both this dark blue and that blue-green that is a little bit lighter, so in the areas that they swirl, it's also going to become lighter. So we still want to have those distinct colors within this piece. So this one we're going to use magic sand for our textured sand appearance. I've used this before and found it easier than normal sand to work with. I like to use a combination of the light brown tan sandy color and white to create the beach. I'm then going to sprinkle some seashells across it and pour clear resin over top to make sure that it stays stuck. This also works if you mix the resin into the sand, but I find it a little bit messier to deal with. I'm then quickly going to pop the bubbles that have come to surface on those colors while they are resting and start the pour. I like to start with the dark blue first and kind of cover the whole board gently with it. I usually reserve a little bit in case I want to drizzle it in later. Then we're going to add the light blue-green. I like to gently mix these and make sure that the entire board is covered before starting to swirl these together. I also take special attention to make sure that near the beach side that the blue and the clear are going to mix together so that we don't end up with a gap between them. Then it's time for the white. So waves are typically crashing ashore, so I like to start by following the shoreline with the white. And as I'm pouring, I realized the white isn't quite as pigmented as I had hoped, but we started pouring it, so we're going to continue and see what happens. A lot of times when we're pouring resin, unless we have everything measured very specifically, it's a total experiment of how the colors are going to mix and swirl. It's also very dependent on the temperature of the room. Seeing as I pour in a garage that doesn't have temperature control, I'm very much at the hands of whatever the weather decides to be that day. Then I use the heat gun to start changing the viscosity of the resin. I focus mainly on the white, as I want the white to start having those little bubbles that pop and create the wave form versus the blue. The blue will get heated alongside it and create some bubbles, but we want to mainly keep that in the white. As I was pouring, I noticed the resin was all running to the top of the platter, so I used a little wedge. In this case, it was one of the spoons that I use for getting pigments out. A popsicle stick would work as well, just to make sure that the resin became back to level. Now a couple days have elapsed and the resin is fully cured. And I have a couple things about this piece that I didn't particularly like. One is that it looks like the sand didn't fully soak up the resin, so some of it looks like it could very easily come loose, and I don't want that happening to anyone who receives this piece. So I'm going to pour clear over the sand as well as the rest of the piece so that it is one smooth layer of clear over the top. The second thing I don't like is the white didn't seem to have enough pigment in it, and there's a little bit of translucentness near the shore. So I'm going to also re-pour the white in that region. Off camera, I have already mixed up a highly pigmented white resin. Once I have that clear coat leveled, I'm going to pour the white up along the shore. I then let it naturally run into that clear and start to develop that pattern. As it starts to get offshore, then I'm going to pour another layer of white and let it melt. Again, I am going to add some heat to this to make sure that the melding happens. Then it's time to stain the edge, and I use a combination of a red oak and a rustic gray beryl stain to come up with what I like to call a pirate ship finish. This gray is always interesting to work with. I swear every time I open it, it is as unmixed as it could possibly be, and it doesn't even look like gray when you first open it. For the color, I use 2 parts of the red oak and 1 part of the gray. And then we always make sure to close the stain cans before we put them away. Give these a quick mix, make sure that they are the color that I was hoping for, and then add the stain to the piece. Now, I think it's really important to get the stain on that inside edge, but I also am very careful that when it gets on any of the sand or the resin, that I get it off right away. Because I use a top coat of resin and I don't sand that top coat and add polish, the top of the resin isn't very porous, but if you're using a project where you do sand, you have to be very careful adding stain, as once the resin is porous, the stain soaks into it very quickly. Even on this, with it being a rather polished looking finish, I wipe the stain off of the resin areas as soon as I can. Then I move to the front, then the edges, and I will add stain to the back. I think it's important to put the stain on the back, as some people like to use these as wall hangings and you'll never see the back, but some people like to use them as serving platters. And when they're being carried, you will see the back. With the stain on the back, I always make sure to add a layer of polyurethane, whether it is intended to be a platter or a wall art. That way the stain can't transfer to anything else, and if it is being used for a platter, it protects it from spills a little bit. And here's our final images. I think this one turned out really unique because of the temperatures of the room when I poured this. Typically, I get waves that are a little bit more bubbled, and these ones are more streaks, but I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this one. And if you're interested in purchasing this or a piece similar to it, check out my Etsy store linked in the description below. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye!